Fagan, also known by other names including Fugatius, was a possibly legendary 2nd century bishop and saint, said to have been sent by the Pope to answer King Lucius's request for baptism and conversion to Christianity. Together with his companion St Deruvian, he was sometimes reckoned as the Apostle of Britain. King Lucius's letter may represent earlier traditions but does not appear in surviving sources before the 6th century. The names of the bishops sent to him does not appear in sources older than the early 12th century, when the story was used to support the independence of the bishops of St David's in Wales and the antiquity of the abbey at Glastonbury in England. The story became widely known following its appearance in Geoffrey of Monmouth's pseudo-historical history of the kings of Britain. This was influential for centuries, and its account of SS Fagan and Deruvian was used during the English Reformation to support the claims of both the Catholics and Protestants. Geoffrey's account is now considered wholly implausible, but Christianity was well established in Roman Britain by the 3rd century. Some scholars therefore argue the stories preserve a more modest account of the conversion of a Romano-British chieftain, possibly by Roman emissaries by these names. Fagan is the presumed namesake of St Fagan's near Cardiff, now the home of a Welsh National History Museum. His feast day does not appear in any medieval Welsh calendar of the saints and is not presently observed by the Anglican, Catholic, or Orthodox churches in Wales. Name: St Fagan's name appears as Fagan in William of Malmesbury's work on the antiquity of the Glastonbury church, written between 1129 and 1139. It is given as Fagan in Geoffrey of Monmouth's pseudo-historical history of the kings of Britain, written around 1136 and sometimes supposed to have been the source of the name's later insertion into William's account. The name has been variously connected with Latin paganus, French Fagan, and Old English Fagan. Wade Evans proposed that the name was a confusion with the Italo-British rhetorician Bachan Pachan, who appears in the Life of St Caddick. The entry on Pope Eleutherius in Petrus Natalibus's late 14th century collection of saints' lives gives Fagan's name as Fugatius, an emendation subsequently copied by Platina and many others. These names were further misspelled in later sources in a variety of ways. Legend. Accounts of St Fagan and his companion Deruvian joined a long-standing narrative concerning King Lucius of Britain and his conversion to Christianity around the time of the Roman emperors Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, a time of general tolerance towards the religion. St Gildas had described the first apostles as arriving during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius. William of Malmesbury's cautious account in the Deeds of the Kings of the English allows that St Philip may have reached the island but quickly leaves such vain imaginations in favour of praising the ancient wattle chapel of St Mary erected by Pope Eleutherius's nameless missionaries, which he called the oldest time acquainted with in England. The current text of On the Antiquity of the Glastonbury Church is rather more florid. Philip is not said to have come himself but to have sent Joseph of Arimathea in precisely AD 63. His initial community died out and the area left to wild beasts, but Fagan and Deruvian found it miraculously preserved, merely reviving its community in AD 166, directed by the Archangel Gabriel and joining the names to the Acts of the Apostles. They were said to have provided pilgrims with 40 years of indulgences, a wildly anachronistic detail, but one quite profitable for the abbey. The accounts in Geoffrey and Gerald make no special mention of Glastonbury. Instead, Gerald's letter from the clerics at St David says that Fagan and Deruvian were the first apostles of all Britain, baptizing its king Lucius and then converting all his subjects after their arrival in 140. It says 27 pagan leaders were replaced by the same number of bishops and 3 archbishops placed over them, including one at St David's. It advances these points in favour of its independence from Canterbury, a particular project of Bishop Bernard. Geoffrey also treats Fagan and Deruvian as the first apostles to Britain, noting the conversion of Lucius's petty kings and success at almost removing paganism from the whole island until the great persecution under Diocletian. He states that the pagan temples were remade into churches and 28 flamens and 3 archflamens were replaced by 28 bishops under the 3 archbishops of London, York, and Culzean. Fagan and Deruvian were then said to have personally returned to Rome for confirmation of the work, returning again with still more clerics. This all supposedly occurred before the death of Lucius in 156. Gerald elsewhere concedes that the archbishop was initially at Culzean but claims it was eventually moved to Menevia. He states the early archbishops administered 12 suffragans each, and each oversaw one of the 5 Roman provinces of Britain: Britannia Prima, Britannia Secunda, Valentia, Flavia, and Maxima. He further concedes, however, his knowledge of the time was mostly based on common report and not certain history. The Book of Llandaff, composed around 1125, names neither emissary from Rome but gives Elvan and Medwin as the names of Lucius's messengers, bearing his letter to the Pope. The 2 accounts were later combined, so that Elfan and Medway are sent off and honoured in Rome and then return with Fagan and Deruvian. Fagan and Elfan were also sometimes credited with the initial establishment at Kongsbury, which was removed in 721 to Tidenton. In the Arno manuscripts, Fagan was called an Italian who came to Britain as a bishop and enthroned himself at Clan Sant Fagan. A separate manuscript credits him with the foundation of the churches at Clan Fagan Vour and at Clan Fagan Vark. The parish churches are now dedicated to St Mary and St Caddoc, respectively. A third manuscript conflates Deruvian with Dauphin, wrongly. In Bartram's estimation, Dauphin is then made the first bishop of Llandaff and the martyr et in Merthyr Dauphin. Fagan is then made his successor at Llandaff. A fourth lists the following triplet among the sayings of the wise. Didst thou hear the saying of Fagan when he had produced his argument? Where God is silent, it is wise not to speak. Lie, arguing in favour of a partial historicity to these figures. Rees noted that all but Elfan had long-standing associations with parish churches in the area around Llandaff, though he admitted none seemed as grand or preeminent as one might expect. Were they actually the apostles of Britain? Bartram replied such dedications must be assumed to post-date Geoffrey's popularity. Legacy. St Fagan's, a village near Cardiff in Wales, continues to bear his name, although following the Norman invasion of Wales a new parish church was erected east of the old chapel and dedicated to St Mary the Blessed Virgin. In 1180, the 16th-century antiquarian John Leland recorded in his travel notebooks that a nearby chapel remained dedicated to Fagan and was sometimes also used as the parish church, but this was in ruins by the time of the English Civil War. A century later, St Fagan's Well was nearby and considered particularly restorative for the falling sickness. St Fagan's Church in the village of Trekinnon near Aberdare in Glamorgan was a new foundation erected from 1851 to 1853. It was destroyed by fire in 1856. Rebuilt by 1856, John Griffith established it as a separate parish from Aberdare's ancient one, which had been dedicated to St John the Baptist prior to the completion of St Elvan's in 1852. The festival of St Fagan does not appear in any surviving medieval Welsh calendar of the saints, but he had some importance following his description as an apostle. The Blessed John Sugar, martyred founded in 1604, invoked Fugatius and Damianus from the gallows as authorities for the antiquity of British Catholicism. Late sources place it on the 3rd of January at Glastonbury, on the 10th of February at Llandaff, on the 8th of August, and on 24 or the 26th of May. This last date, the traditional day of the baptism of King Lucius by the missionaries, is sometimes given as an observance of the Eastern Orthodox Diocese of Thyatira and Great Britain, although in fact St Fagan's Day is currently unobserved by any of the major denominations of Wales.